All right, this is Chapter 2, Lesson 5, Percent of Change. So, in words, a blank, blank, blank is a ratio that compares the change in quantity to the original amount. In those three blanks, you're going to write percent of change. So a percent of change is a ratio that compares the change in quantity to the original amount. So the equation that I have is percent of change equals the amount of change over the original amount. So when you compare the amount of change to the original amount in a ratio, you are finding the percent of change. The percent of change is based on the original amount. If the original quantity is increased, then it is called a blank, blank, blank. If the original quantity is decreased, then it is called a blank, blank, blank. So, if it's increased, it's called a percent of increase. And if it's decreased, it's called a percent of decrease. So increased is percent of increase, decreased is a percent of decrease. All right, so let's take a look at an example. The example that I have says find the percent of change in the cost of gasoline from 1970 to 2010. Round to the nearest whole percent if necessary. Okay, so what it means if necessary is when you've done all your finding out and all your solving. If it's a decimal, you can round to the nearest percent, whole percent. So gas from 1970 cost $1.30. Gas from 2010 costs $2.95. Since the 2010 is blank than the 1970 price, this is a percent of blank. So if I'm going from 2010, right, I'm going from 1970 to 2010. So that's an increase. So since the 2010 is greater than the 1970 price, this is a percent of increase. Okay, so I'm finding the amount of increase. So in order to do that, I subtract my two numbers. $2.95 minus $1.30 gives me $1.65. And then I put that over my original amount. Now, my original amount is the gas price from 1970. That's the first price they gave me. It's the original price. It's the price that was first based off of the year. Okay? So, I take my two numbers, I subtracted them. That's my first step. My second step is to divide what I just found divided by the original amount. So, $1.65 divided by $1.30 is 1.27. So 127%. Remember, you're finding percent, you need to move the decimal two places, okay, or multiply by 100. You're moving the decimal two places to the right. So the cost of gasoline increased by about 127% from 1970 to 2010. All right, on this page is a try it problem. I want you to go ahead, pause the video, try it out, and when you're done, we'll go over the answer together. Now that you've had a chance to try out the try problem, let's go over the answer together. So the question they asked me was the price of a radio was $20. It is on sale for $15. What is the percent change in the price of a radio? So is it an increase or a decrease? It's a decrease. So this is a percent of decrease. Okay, so step one, the first step I need to do is I need to find my amount of decrease, the amount that it changed. Okay, so I'm going to take my first number, which is 20, and my second number, and I'm going to subtract them. 20 minus 15 gives me 5. That's my percent, that's my amount of decrease. Okay, so this is amount of decrease. Now I take that $5, right, that becomes the top of my fraction, and I divide by my original amount, which is 20. So I take 5 divided by 20. This bar right here is the same thing as saying 5 divided by 20. Not 20 divided by 5, 5 divided by 20. When I do that, I get 0.25, and then I need to multiply this times 100, so 25%. So it's a decrease, so it's a 25% decrease. All right, so to continue on with percent of change, the blank blank is a ratio that compares the inaccuracy of an estimate or the amount of error to actual amount. In that blank, you're going to write percent error. So the percent error is a ratio that compares the inaccuracy of an estimate or amount of error to the actual amount. This is almost the exact same thing as percent of change. It's almost the exact same thing that we actually did. They just call it something different. Okay? So you're taking the amount of error divided by the actual amount. So finding the percent error is similar to finding the percent of change. Instead of finding the amount of increase or decrease, you will find the amount an estimate is greater or less than the actual amount. Again, same process. You subtract the numbers, then you divide by the original amount. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. So, Ahmed wants to practice free throws. He estimates the distance from the free throw line to the hoop and marks it with chalk. Ahmed's estimate was 13.5 feet. The actual distance should be 15 feet. Find the percent error. So the two numbers they gave me were 15 and 13.5. So I subtract them. 15 minus 13.5 is 1.5 feet. That's step 1. I subtract my numbers. Step 2 is finding the percent error. So I take the amount of error, which was the 1.5, divided by my actual amount. That's what it should have been. It should have been 15 feet. So I'm going to take 1.5 divided by 15. 1.5 divided by 15 is 0.1 or 10%. So the percent error is 10%. All right, there's also a try problem on this page. I want you to go ahead, pause the video, try it out, and when you're done, we'll go over the answer together. All right, now that you've had a chance to try out the try it problem, let's go over the answer together. So the problem asks me, find the percent error if the estimate is $230 and the actual amount is $245. Round to the nearest whole percent. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to find what the difference is between those two numbers. So I subtract them. So this is step 1. I subtract. I take 245 minus 230, and that's $15. Okay, it's a difference of $15. So then, step 2, I divide. Okay, I take this number that they gave me and the actual amount. It has to be the original amount or actual amount, which is 245. So I take 15 divided by 245, which gives me 0.06. And then my last step, I multiply by 100. So when I do that, 0.606 times 100 is 6%. So my percent error was 6%. And that is the end of Chapter 2, Lesson 5.